There are a bunch of things I want to do to change up this code, but first I want to talk about what we did that got this label into view. Let me bring it back up. Then we'll talk about the way you might refactor it, and then how to get that button working, all in pretty intuitive ways. So for the label, what did we do in this labelish function? You can describe it on a high level. What do we do first? Sam. Yeah. So we create an instance. That's not next one. Instance. Then what do we do? So we set properties. And then what was the very last thing we did? So we added as a subview to what? Yeah. So we've called that view the default view or something else. I don't know. Called it a bunch of things, but in this view controller, like we talked about before, there is an embedded view. In Interface Builder, it's this guy that's highlighted that just covers the entire screen of the view controller. We can refer to that exact view as self.view. What is a subview? Nima. Part of the view, okay. Let's work with that. So we've talked about like subclasses and superclasses, right? The subclasses had all the traits of a superclass inside of it. In terms of views, a subview is pretty much inside of its superview. So this label as a subview of the default view in this view controller is somewhere inside of the view. So now if we looked at self.view.subviews, that's an array of UI views. A label is a subclass of UI view. So that's all it is. I want to show you maybe the best practice for doing this. We want to do these two steps together, but we want to do this step separately. Why do you think that is?
Something about it having to do with the view did load.
Something to do with the view did load. Okay. Sunny?
Because you might have functionality of an app where you change the properties.
I have functionality. Tell me more about that.
So for example, if in this one function you have your label font to be a certain color and you wanted to change it later, you want to separate the responsibility of this one function to be able to do that and not also have it deal with views and subviews.
Yeah. Maybe to put that differently, like we might want a way to refer to this label that's being added to the default view, right? Like if we call this function, it adds a label, but we have no quick way to refer to it as if maybe it was an outlet, like we've done before. When we've got outlets, that's just been something like IB outlet, weak, var, where, weak, var, this is really good. Label is a UI label connected somewhere. All we're going to do here is get rid of these references. So we're going to say it's not coming from interface builder, and it's not weak because we do actually need a reference to it. I know ARC is not everyone's favorite here, and that's okay. So instead of doing that, maybe we might initialize it using this frame that we had here. Throw that guy in here. But if when I load the view, I want all this stuff in it as well, what is a way that maybe we talked about on Friday that you can kind of have the behavior of a function without actually calling or naming that function? Create a property, a computed property? How do you mean? Before initializing it, I set its type to UI label, like this. Okay. Throw this stuff in there. Okay. Okay. Let label equal that. And then throw all this stuff in there. Cool. Now return label. What's that? Do that guy? Cool. So, here's the fun part. This is not a computed property. What is it? What is all? It's a closure. This is the same thing as if we had a function called create label that returns a UI label does all that stuff, except we haven't named it. It's an unnamed function, and we have called it. So what we're saying is this label is equal to the return value of calling this closure, which could be the same exact thing as this label's value equal to the same thing as the return function, the return of this guy. Create label, property initializers run before self. Ah, interesting. Doesn't like what we just did there. Anyone have any idea why? Let's try building it. Ah, succeeded. Well, let's see what happened with the rest of it. It's there. Cool. So why could I do this as a closure? Well, let me add all that stuff back. Why could I do this as a closure and not a function? You have access to the label outside the function. What was that one? Alex? Let's see what that error was again. Cannot use instance member within property initializer. Property initializers run before self is available. Phoenix? like we did with this closure? Yeah, that's what we want to do, but I do want to talk about what this issue is, because we're going to see it all the time when we create programmatic UI. Sunny. It's even before that. We haven't initialized the view controller. So if we go and we try to say a property of this class is going to be equal to calling this function, well, when I try to set up my view controller, set up an instance of this object, it's going to say, okay, let's try to create a label. Let's call that function. But the problem is there is no view controller. Nothing's been initialized yet. If you remember when we have a class, let's say class something, we set a default value. Say we set it to 1. When we go to set these values, that runs before the view controller is actually initialized, right? It's in the definition itself. So this function can't actually be called because we need to be able to look inside of that view controller, look for its instance method, and say, hey, you, Mr., let's use your instance method. But there isn't any Mr. there. There's no self. There's no view controller. So we can't use this thing called create label, which is why we have an unnamed function, because we don't need self. We don't need to look for the definition of a function somewhere inside of this view controller, but instead, there's just this closure. It's got no name, it's got no owner, there's no way to refer to it anywhere else. It's just a thing that's being defined and then called immediately. Weird, right? You're going to see it all the time. So the practice is generally create and use this function to actually initialize a value on label so that you're not trying to create a default value before self is available. Alex.
I also work on having equal sign and
Like how? Like that, right? Yeah, it's kind of also a closure. This is generally what you're going to see more. It's the same thing as, like, we call this function. This is generally what you'll see. It works, right? That's cool. But that's also, before we go any further, that, if you do remember computed properties, is the same as getting it. And so what you're not doing is storing an actual value. Now it's a computed property, and so when you refer to that label, it'll go and get that stuff for it, but you can't actually save any values to it. So yeah. Difference here is going to be when I want to refer to it later and change it and stuff, I'm going to need some actual value saved in there as a stored property. Levi.
When I did this, I created the first.
What's good?
The one that I'm doing now.
Okay.
It was very convenient because then I could use the height of the bounds of the screen to set the application rather than knowing exactly where it's at. So you know, up or down, so height by 2.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to do that? You can't do that now because it doesn't exist yet.
That's right.
Is there a way to have it completely?
So you're saying what you want to do is, let me just get rid of some code here. You want to be able to refer to self.view, which actually has some properties like center, stuff like that.
Well, I
Mm-hmm.
It would be like complaining about yeah, that one's not like it's very convenient to have access to it.
It was very convenient. Yeah. What I would say is generally what you'll see is something like this, and then someone will say like layout views or have a function that does that. So in here, you'd set maybe the frame, but then adjust the position afterwards. Because what this label should not know actually, and we'll get into this with like using frame versus using constraints, but what this label should not actually know is its relationship to any other views. Like it could use those to, you'd like to use those to measure, but like ideally, this view, which is very dumb, doesn't need to know anything about itself. The view controller can go and change that stuff for it. So to reiterate on Levi's question, maybe we want to know some information about self.view, the default view for this view controller, in order to say where label should be. But what we should do with label is create it, and then later on, tell the view controller, hey, if you've got all your views, go ahead and do stuff. Like go ahead and reposition them. Maybe set up some constraints. B.
So my question would go into this as the whole frame. Then you will just see like, oh, this one is more, I guess, clarification on why are you using it and how is it getting the X, Y with value.
Yes. Why are we using it? Because most things in UIKit, or pretty much anything inheriting from UI view, have this initializer. So if we look at UI view equal UI view, we'll see there are only a few initializers. We can just initialize UI view and then do what Levi said later. This just creates a view, but it actually has no size or anything. You won't be able to really know where it is. It has no size and it has no position. But what we've seen is that with constraints, we can set the size and set the position. This label, for right now until we go and do the constraints-based way, this label has a set position and a set size. So this is just one example. But yeah, we could have just initialized empty UI label. This would not show up right now. When we go and later on say, hey, view controller, tell our things where to go, then you can set the constraints that tell it like where to be relative to the rest of the views. Whereas this is a fixed position, unless you later move it.
It's kind of like what you drag something into the storyboard, right? And it has its limits.
Yeah, like when you add something and don't add any constraints, if you were to rotate the screen, it wouldn't look great. Cool. How do y'all feel about this? Yeah. All we did was create an instance of something inside of a closure, return it, and call that closure. Looks weird, but you've done it a million times with functions. Cool. Do you want to make the switch now? So going back to Sunny's point, if I want to later refer to the switch, which that's not a great name for it, green mode switch, which is a UI switch, I should probably create an instance of it in my view controller so that I can later on say, green mode switch, what are you going to do? Allison, what's your question? Ah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. That's because the app doesn't know which view controller to launch, right? We're going to do that at the end of the lesson because I kind of want to work backwards. For now, I would say add back your storyboard just so that it works. All right, let's make this switch real quick. Let the switch be this guy. What is this target thing? Anyone figure that out? Let's add target. Target is self. Okay. Action. Okay. Switch pressed again. Let's look at this selector keyword real quick, because it's an important one. Add target selector Swift. Add target. Associates a target object and action method with the control. What's the control here? You've used it all the time, Aaron. Which control are we adding a target to? Yeah. So our control here is UI switch. UI switch is literally a subclass of UI control. And all we're doing here is we're saying what happens when the switch is, the action is, we do this thing when the switch's value has changed. What do you think this value changed is? Belongs to a var, UI control.event, UI control event. Kind of looks like an enum. These are actually, it's like a set of specific events from something called an option set. Basically, these are all the different things you can do with the control. You know, you can press a button, but you can also click and drag things, or you can like rotate things. Those all go into different controls. And they're each defined in here as UI control.event. So for a switch, value change is just, did it go from on or on to off or off to on? That's all we're saying. We're saying when it goes from off to on or on to off, do this thing, switch pressed again. That's it. How do y'all feel about that? So instead of having an IB action, we are adding the action. If you look at the switch, when you set up an action, it's looking for an event. So it's looking for one of those things from that enum called UI control.event. This is just a really nice layout for the exact same thing as adding a target. And the only difference is there's no link between Interface Builder and our file now. Cool. All right. Now the million-dollar question. What does this function do? Ayla,
Yes.
what does this function do?
Gives functionality selected.
Yeah, but like what does it do?
Oh, switches between multiple on.
Okay. It's got a switch. And all it does is set some variable called green mode status here to whatever the position of that switch is, whether it's on or off. Then there's some kind of did set here, which sets all that stuff up. Great. So we're going to do the really scary thing now. Going to remove our outlets. I'm going to get rid of these functions.
You don't have to disconnect them first, doesn't matter.
So actually, if I just delete them from here, those outlets and actions should be gone. To make sure, I'll just look at this side panel. And this arrowy guy called the connections inspector would have shown the outlets and the actions. All right, let's see if it works. What do you all think? Well, these guys are not going to work. So let's say that's label and that's green mode switch. Great. Label, 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 label. Cool. Build failed. That's so upsetting. I have to return the switch at the end of this function. Try it now. All right. Let's go. Man. Why aren't they there? I didn't add the subviews. That's right. So again, I said we're going to break these things out in their definition. Got a label, got a switch. We defined them. We said what they do and what they have in them. And now we're just going to make sure, maybe I'll make a private function called private func add subviews. We'll say self.view.add subview label self.view.add subview. There's already something called add subviews. So I'm going to say maybe a more descriptive thing might be to set up subviews. Add that. I'm going to add green mode switch. I'm going to call it in the view did load. Set up subviews. One last thing, and then I want to take a 5-minute break. This green mode status, when I set it, it goes and it does something that actually changes the views. But if the views don't exist yet, then it's not going to change them, right? So I'm going to just change the order of these things and say set up the subviews first, and then go ahead and change the green mode status. Let's run it, see if it works. Green mode is on. No, it's not. Green mode is on. Green mode is off. Green mode is on. Green mode is off. Okay, so it looks like in our initial state, let's launch it again. None of this is persisted, so it'll work the same every time. It says green mode is on because green mode status is set here, but we never set the switch. So at least initially, we're going to want the switch dot is on to equal true. And then every time it's switched, because we're doing that action, it's going to go ahead and do that for us. Now it's kind of working how we want it to work. So we set up initially that it's on, just like we set up all the stuff about the label. And then every other time we do anything, we don't have to refresh the switch, because the switch is the thing whose target action is actually calling that function ultimately. So all I did was make sure that initially the switch is on, because green mode starts as on. So one more time, I'm just initializing the switches on in the same way that I'm initializing, for example, that the label's text alignment is center. Some questions? All right, let's take a 5-minute break till 11:43. That's right, till 5 minutes from 11:43. If anyone can do that math from me, sorry. Mm-hmm. All I'm doing is adding both of them as subviews. So self.view.add subviews. Hello to you. It's gonna.
I have an error somewhere and I don't know where messing everything up.
Let's see. Let's see.
Watch me fix it like right now. Is that it?
No. So this is a closure, and what we need that closure to do is the same thing as. Yeah. What do you want to return? Mm-hmm. And so the last step is you've defined, like, think of the closure as a function. You've defined the function, but if UI switch needs to equal whatever the return value of this is, we actually have to call the closure
Oh,
because we need a return value.
okay. Can I see the rest of it?
I just pushed it to GitHub. I don't think so. Around this tomorrow. Mm. Mm. Okay. So we've got that stuff working. That's great. Sounds delightful. To Levi's question before, say I wanted to use self in one of these closures. Again, I would caution you against doing that for purposes of setting the height and the width. You could do it in there in a specific way though. But let's say, for example, in some other situation, you wanted to use this let the text to show at launch equal we just launched. I want the labels text to be that. Text to show at self.v text to show at launch. If you remember, we can't use self in here. Let's try building it. Gonna get a failure. It says it has no member. V text to show at launch. Interesting. Let's make sure it's spelled correctly. Oh, it is. Has no member. The text to show at launch. So this is weird. It's coming up for a very specific reason, like we said before. The view controller is not instantiated yet. There's no access to this property. But what we can do is we can use a special keyword called lazy. Is anyone familiar with lazy? Can you tell me more about it? A lazy variable? So what would that be? I want it to be like this. See if that works. Oh, why does that work? What's the purpose of a lazy variable? It doesn't happen immediately. Yeah, so we're not actually initializing this label as a property immediately. So Phoenix said this lazy is so that we're not using it immediately. And even more, it's even more helpful than that. We're not even using a lazy variable until the first time we refer to it. So if we're doing stuff in the view did load, that means that the view inside of this view controller loaded. So we do have an instance of the view controller. In terms of what exists at that point in time, we created a VC, and then we loaded up self.view. And then anything happening in there can happen. And so the first time that we go and try to access this lazy variable called label is after we know there exists a VC. So this lazy just means this label isn't getting used until it's referenced, or until it's accessed, or a whole bunch of other words. Until we go and use label, we don't need to think of it as existing. I know that's a weird way to put it. Someone asked me what I just meant by that. What did I mean by that? All right, let's do it again. A lazy variable doesn't get used or accessed or referred to until we use or access or refer to it. So we are not creating this label in the same way that we create a value or a property that has some set value in that instance of the class. Instead, we don't need that label's value until it's actually referenced or accessed. Adam. Watch out for Hildy's face.
I'm confused about how that's how they were working with that access unless you were calm.
Yeah, but this is a little different in terms of whether that label needs to exist at initialization. So when I create a new instance of this class, that value is there and can be accessed. The lazy variable, that variable is defined, but until we access it, it doesn't actually create the value for it.
So does this have to do with life cycle stuff that we're talking about?
Yes. It does. It's a great question. Ask it again.
Does this have to do with life cycle?
It does in a way, because in terms of the view controller lifecycle, view did load is this step when we have a self.view, which means that if we have self.view, we have self. And so if we are calling this function when self.view exists, we know self exists, and so we can refer to self. We can comfortably do that.
This is similar to the ID action being able to speak.
That's a little different. That's, if you remember the terrible day of ARC, that's how it's stored in memory. This is more in terms of how the objects are created. We will eventually come back to ARC. If you're excited.
A lazy variable is not instantiated right away.
Mm-hmm.
It's defined,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we're able to access it later if we're creating other functions, for instance.
That's why we're able to, yes. You say it again.
I was just thinking, in the way that we cannot access self dot the text to show it launch unless we make it a variable, a lazy variable, why are we able to use the variable label later on in the functions if it doesn't exist yet? Why can we reference it? It's because we have defined it even though we haven't instantiated it.
Sorry, what did that end up being your question?
You already answered my question.
Okay, cool.
So I asked and answered it.
Cool. Yeah, this is still a variable. We can still refer to it. But in terms of using it, we can also still do that. The only difference is until we try to use it, it doesn't exist. Until we need it, it's not there. Right. You don't get it. Yes, let's work backwards.
So if it doesn't exist until we need it, can that cause problems when we first load it? It would just be created when it loads?
Yeah. So ultimately, we don't really see the view did load. We don't really see the initialization of the view controller. Excuse me. We just see what happens after view will appear in terms of the life cycle of view controllers. So all this stuff is happening when I've got that white screen. But it's not magic. We don't get from the definition here to seeing all that stuff. There's still the life cycle, right? And so this stuff is happening before we see it, but in terms of setting up the view controller, it's happening after initializing this instance of view controller, because view controller is just the class. It's happening after the view did load. It's happening, so after the view did load, that means we have access to literally a property called self.view. Just like if we created something, we'd have self.value. So it feels like it's going on behind the scenes, but it is happening in a certain order.
So it happens after self.view exists.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Allison?
You said that using lazy on a variable or a constant, would that affect compile time?
Would that affect compile time?
Or rather, it's only really being used when it's calling a certain function or method or whatnot, whatever you do to it, as opposed to just kind of going in order.
Not compile time. Maybe it might affect like the view lifecycle, but compile time is just like how to create the file that becomes the app. Yeah. That's a good question. How does it affect the view lifecycle? Try to get you an answer. Yep. Okay. Lazy var. And honestly, what I would suggest is if you're creating views programmatically, just make them all lazy. So if you've got a variable that's a view that you're creating programmatically, just make it lazy. What's that? All these objects, yeah. Like, maybe that's me being like way too hard and fast about it, but it's just easy. Yes, I'm being lazy about it. Okay. There are two more things I want to do. I want to do them kind of quickly. Can I? Yeah, later. Okay. So what we did was we created a switch in a specific spot in the view. We created a label in a specific spot in the view. This is dealing with the view as if it's a rectangle where x and y start in the top left corner, and then as we go down the view, y goes up. As we go to the right in the view, x goes up. For that to work, we have to know the size of the view, self.view. We have to know kind of intuitively how far things are in the view. We have to change where things are when we rotate the screen. What's a better way of doing it that we've all used to some varying degree of success? Constraints. So maybe instead of creating a label with a frame, we just use auto layout. We can use auto layout from our view controller level. Do you want me to just do it and then we'll talk about it? Okay. So what I did with that button when we created an interface builder is I just centered it in the X and the Y directions. I'm just going to do that again using constraints. I'm going to create a private function called add constraints to subviews. All I'm going to say is green mode switch dot There's this thing called an NS layout y-axis anchor. The description of it is a layout anchor representing the center, the vertical center of the view's frame. Weird. I also see this thing called center. I just want to clarify. CG point is kind of using that frame approach to positioning. This is not auto layout. Center, the property center on any view, is saying the exact position of the center of that view that you're working with. That's some absolute position. With auto layout, when we're creating constraints, we want to try to have relative position. That's the whole point of the constraints, is move things around based on the screen, based on other views, blah, blah, blah. These anchors are a way of referring to that, but letting it work more dynamically. So I just want to say again, center is like literally a place on the screen. Center Y anchor and center X anchor are things that kind of work the same way, but are a little more dynamic. Center X anchor is saying, what's the center of this view? And so I'm going to say the center of this view is going to be constrained to, we're going to use this equal to. Are they calling for me? We're going to say it's equal to, and it's looking for some other layout anchor. It's looking for, if I'm using equal to, and I'm talking about the X anchor, this is where we have to start visualizing our constraints. If I've got a view, I'm saying I want the center X anchor to be equal to something. It has to be equal to some other position on some other view. The easiest thing we could do, if I want to center it in my default view, in the X direction, so I want to make it equal to self.view.setDirectX anchor. So I'm adding a constraint saying the center of my switch is equal to the center of the view. You have definitely made this constraint before. This constant is saying maybe how far off from that center might it be. So I could adjust that value and add it in, or I could just say it's equal to the center of that view. Let's go ahead and run this. So it's not centered. And why is that? I did call it, I believe. Yeah. What's that? I didn't make it active. Whoa. So I created a constraint. But for any constraint, let's say, let this constraint equal that guy. Now the type of this variable, if you remember, everything in our storyboard is an object. When we do that little click between views, like click between the button to the label like we did before to create maybe vertical spacing or horizontal spacing, that was also an object. That wasn't magic. That was an NS layout constraint. And what we did here is we said, create an NS layout constraint that is center X anchor equal to the view's center X anchor. The last thing we have to do to get this thing to work is for any NS layout constraint, we have to set it to is active, the active state of the constraint. I want that to be true. It's just a Boolean value adding it. And typically what you'll see in practice is you don't set a variable called this constraint, you just create it and do the thing. Let's see it now. Damn, it still didn't move. Why is that? I will just tell you why it is. Because we have said where its X and Y positions should be already. So it's been placed in the view. What we're going to want to do is just initialize an empty UI switch. And so I'm going to create the center Y anchor to be a pretty similar thing. Center Y anchor to be equal to the center Y anchor. Let's have a look. Oh, it's gone. Why is it gone? Oh, there it is. Interesting. Why didn't it work? I'm missing something inside of my closure. What do you think that is? Oh my God, what is that? Iram, have you ever heard of this translates auto resizing mask into constraints thing?
Yeah.
Do you know what it does?
Not exactly. I just want to give it
Me either. Yeah. But every time you go to create your constraints, you just set that value equal to false. Trust me on this one. You're just going to use this all the time. And I'm just going to say, when I set up my views, I'll say label dot whatever that thing is called, translates, auto resizing mask into constraints, a value which determines whether the view's auto resizing mask is translated into auto layout constraints. I think it has something to do with the view trying to figure out where its constraints are, but we're trying to set those things specifically by ourselves. Boom, set it equal to false. Just like with lazy, I would just recommend using this all the time. So I'm going to do that for both subviews in here when I set up my subviews. Green mode, switch, dot translates, blah, 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 is equal to false. I hope that works. Yeah. Oh, we lost the label, dang. It's because we haven't set any constraints for the label. Oh, that's right, it's up here. So we haven't set any constraints. But we did constrain our button. And it works. We set its position. That's awesome. Albert. Hey, bud. I want our label to come down here. When you made things in Storyboard, how did you maybe center this label on the center of a button? You could constrain it on horizontal and vertical. I could also just set up its center X to be the same center X as my green mode switch. So just like we did in our, like we've done in our storyboard all the time, I'm going to try to say that like this switch whose position I set relative to the default view, I'm sorry, I'm going to say the view whose position I set relative to the default views of the whole screen is the switch. And then I'm going to position everything else based on that. And so I'm going to say that our label I'm going to say that there is some kind of vertical positioning between them. I'm going to say that it's centered on the X. And then what that's going to do is, if you remember, each view needs to have an X, a Y, and then a height and a width. The vertical spacing is going to help me set the Y. The horizontal centering, I don't really know how to demonstrate that here, sorry. I'm going to set the X, but the height and the width still need to be set. So let me just show you real quick what happens there. These are the same constraints you know and love. So our labels, center X anchor, it's constrained, constraint is equal to green mode, center X anchor, sorry. And trust me, you're going to run into this error all the time, or not even error, just situation. Make sure you're remembering whether you're matching X and X and Y, because you'll often set center x anchor of one equal to center y anchor of the other, and then be confused for hours as to why it doesn't show up, and it's literally just the difference of this letter y and x. Just want to spare you of that one. Also this omega, don't use that. Okay. Allison, how do I make this constraint actually work? Yes. Dot is active is equal to true. Great.
That's any constraint you set programmatically.
Mm-hmm. Any constraint, you have to say it's actually active. Because if we launch this,
You can also set the label itself to be, like set that, never mind.
keep going.
I was looking at something else. But there's, what I have is NS layout constraint dot active, and then I have within parameters, or like parens, all of the constraints, so that I don't have to set all of them.
Can you slack me that? Cool, we might have a refactor. All right. All right. Let's do the y constraint. Okay, Levi, what do you want it to be? So I want it to be offset. I don't know what that means. Ah, okay. Well, the good thing is there's something called a top anchor and a bottom anchor. And that's another NS layout axis anchor, specifically for the y-axis, the top and the bottom. You can see all these things visually when you create, again, let's just look at a view. Can I please create a view? No? Okay. I create a label here, and then I do the atom thing. No, I do the atom thing, duplicate it. Cool. The top, when I create constraints between these labels, the vertical spacing is the space from the top anchor of this bottom one to the bottom anchor of this top one. Someone asked me what I mean. Okay. All I'm saying is from the top of this guy, let's figure out the space to the bottom of that guy. That's it. I just want to count points between them. So label.top anchor dot constraint is equal to, I don't know, green mode switch dot bottom anchor dot nothing. And then here, this constant value, which we didn't use before because these were all equal, this is saying how far these things are offset. Cool? All right. So let's make them 30 points apart. Set equal to is active. True. Let's see what happens. So let's see if I got a cool thing from Sunny. Thanks, Aram. Cool. What's this? Oh, it's this stuff. Sorry. Neat. Rad. Awesome. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Everything's where we want it to be. Publish it in the App Store. Sounds good. All right, Sunny found this thing, which is pretty cool, called NSLayout constraint dot activate. Whoa. Activate. Activates each constraint in the specified array. Pretty cool, right? Oh my God, he's so hot right now. I love that movie. Okay, so now I can remove all these dot is actives, dot is active. Oh, yes. Put them all inside this array as an argument to this function. Kind of love it. Thank you, Sunny. Boom. Activate. Constraints, activate. That's all we did. I probably did something wrong. Ah, that makes sense. Comma, comma, comma. Make sure it works. Cool. So that just sets is active to true for all of them. Wonder, is there a disactivate or disable? Figure it out later. Cool. Love it. Thank you. We were doing all this stuff programmatically. I want to show you one more thing. Let's take a 5-minute break. Promise it won't be very long, but then you're going to be like, what? And then we're going to do it again, and you're going to be like, what? And then it's okay, because if you just like using a lazy variable and just like using this translates auto resizing mask into constraints, if you just do it, it will work. So let's take a 5-minute break until 12:25. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. Okie dokie. Let's do it. We're going to do this. Everyone click on your main.storyboard file. Okay? Everyone hit delete. Move it to trash. Say goodbye. Empty your trash. Delete it? Well, let's run it and see what happens now. It's going to crash. Golly gee. It's going to crash. Oh no. It's going to crash. It said it couldn't find a storyboard named main in bundle NS bundle. It's still looking for something called main.storyboard, even though we deleted it. Dang. Well, let's just give up and go home. Hildy. Yeah, let's hear it. Oh, yes. Let's go to this info.plist. So the reason it's still looking for something called main.storyboard is because we tell it to. We tell it in our info.plist, which kind of just generally says, how is this program going to work? We tell it, if you want this program to work, look for something called main when you're looking for a storyboard. So just go to that line and delete it. Where? Here? What? This guy? Well, now I don't know what to do. Main interface. Where are you looking? Where? Here? Ooh. Okay. You can remove it from there. I want you all to get comfortable with main.plist though. Ooh, we're going to talk so much about this very soon. I'm so excited for all of you. You could look for it there. Certainly valid. The way I'm used to doing it, I guess, is just deleting it from the info list. Tia. Yes. So you might see multiple p-lists because for each of these targets, which often you have multiple of if you've got tests in there. So if you go to that big blue like blueprint file at the outermost thing, the thing that also comes up as some whatever your project is called .xcode proj. For each target, there needs to be an info.plist. And so for each target, let's say there were tests in this, there would be another thing called info.plist. Within each target's folders, it's going to try to read the info.plist file that's in there to launch your app. And so if I drag this guy somewhere else, I hope something doesn't happen. That's good. We'll get an error because it can't find that info.plist for the target that we're trying to run, which is all the stuff in here. So I need this guy to be in here. Damn, it's going to crash again. This is so upsetting. Why is it crashing? Couldn't find the storyboard called name. Well, let's make sure it's gone. Seems to be gone. I'm really upset. Yeah, B.
How is the next other like a table view and
Yeah. The lovely thing is going to be that you can create a UI table view in your view controller. And even more incredible, it's amazing. Michelle, how would I create an instance of this view controller? Have you ever created an object based on a definition that you've created? Sunny, how did you do it? We don't need a singleton. What if I wanted to make 100 of these? I would just say, let VC equal view controller. Right? Just like with any other object. So, the way that we're going to get into this is we're going to say, somewhere, let's create an instance of this. Because all the code is in there programmatically, and it has no initializers. So, we're all good. I'm going to get rid of this, the text to show at launch, because we won't need it. Going to application key manifest. Cool. Okay. So, if you are still running the old Xcode, which I don't know if any of you are, all right, you're going to see a bunch of different functions in here. In the new Xcode, there are only 3 of them. This app delegate is just, what do you think it does? Yeah, it's a delegate for your application. So your app says to the app delegate, do a whole bunch of things for me, please. And that's all built into here. So you don't really need to know what to do. You could look into the definition of a UI application delegate, set of methods that you use to manage shared behaviors for your app. Don't know. Doesn't matter. But if you're on the old version of Xcode, everything I'm about to do in a different place right now, you should do in this did finish launching with options. So here's your delegate. It's a function called application did finish launching with options. What do you think this function does? So it doesn't actually launch the app, but just like there is a view lifecycle, there is an application lifecycle. Kind of like view did load. This is did finish launching. So if you ever looked at, I don't know, the simulator when you've launched your app, it shows up white for a little while, then it figures out what it's doing. At some point in there, it has finished launching your app. There are plenty of other parts of the application lifecycle, but did finish launching, the point where you know that the application itself, which, oh my God, is an object called UI application, has finished launching. So the app is launched, a whole bunch of stuff happens, you can use it. What does that mean? Doesn't matter right now. But in your application, there's something called a scene. What is a scene? An object that represents one instance of your app's user interface. So all the stuff on your screen is inside or represented by a UI scene, which is just another object. When we said that Swift is an object-oriented language, all iOS applications are just made up of objects. Everything in there, including UI application itself. And so there are objects for the app, there are objects for representing the entire user interface, there are objects for view controllers, there are objects for views. Everything is an object. The scene is a representation of the user interface, not to be confused with the UI window, which is the backdrop for that actual interface and the object that dispatches events to your views. If you want to do stuff in your app, you're going to do it to the window. If we want to, for example, add view controllers to our app, we're going to add them to the window. Cool? Should we do it? Yeah. All right. So here's the cool thing. Scene has within it, actually, this is rather new to me. Yeah, this is the right function. Okay. Scene has within it, scene is a UI scene. Let's go to scene. Scene has a scene session, it has a delegate, has some functions called open, it's got a protocol. It's got within it something called a window scene. So we can say, let window scene equal scene as a UI window scene, specific type of scene that manages one or more windows for your app. Cool. Has all the functionality of a window scene inside of a UI scene. This is like how our URL responses have all the properties of an HTTP URL response. So we can successfully downcast a scene into a window scene. Weird. Weird. But that's okay. Consider replacing let window scene with underscore. I don't want to do that. Oh man. I didn't realize that was there. But I'm glad we got to go through it. Use this method to configure and attach the UI window to the provided UI window scene. If using a storyboard, the window property will automatically be initialized and attached to the scene. This delegate does not imply the connecting scene or sessions are new. Well, wish I knew what that meant, but what is this very important note? If you're using a storyboard, the window property will automatically be initialized and attached to the scene. So storyboards do a whole bunch of UI stuff for you, but also if they're set up, they already attach to the window. We don't have a storyboard, so now we gotta go and attach to the window. We'd say, use this window. We could just create another window. But let's talk about what windows are again. The backdrop for your app's user interface and the object that dispatches events for your views. When we talk about computers, what is the window? More just less technical definition. The screen. So if we create a new window, just like with most things out of UIKit, we're going to be able to create it with a frame. Check this out. There's something called UI screen. It's an object that defines the properties associated with a hardware-based display. I don't know, some other thing. Oh my God, there's a singleton on it. And there is a way to just find the size of the screen. So this is something called a frame. The UI window is going to have the frame of the entire screen. So UI window, who really cares? The object that dispatches events to your views that we are creating programmatically, that isn't automatically being created for us, we're going to create that object the size of the screen. Makes sense, right? And again, this is one of those things where if we just do it this way, it's going to work forever. So, but I want you to understand that even from the launch of the application, we are programmatically setting up how it's going to work here. We set up labels and views. We're also literally saying the area of interaction in our program is going to be the size of the whole screen. That's what this is doing. I'm going to say window, which is an optional UI window, and that's fine. We're going to say its window scene is the window scene that was created by this function, the one we downcast from scene. So this is something we don't have to worry about. Again, Allison? Yes, because starting in Xcode 11, or whatever we're on, I don't care. In the new Xcode, they've broken out the functionality. There used to be like 8 functions in the app delegate, and then they decided maybe it would be better if we broke out that behavior from how the app actually works to how the app works can be in one place and how the scene works can be in another place. So in terms of the interface, that's all set up in the scene delegate. In terms of the app itself, like this piece of software that's being launched and converted to some kind of like usable program, that's on the app delegate. Scene delegate's going to hold like how you begin to create that window, how you create what the user actually interacts with. Yes, we would have to reconfigure a lot of things. But it, in many cases, could be as simple as copying and pasting out of the app delegate into the scene delegate. Yeah. So we said the window, its scene is this window scene, whatever is being created by this function. Honestly, who cares? Then we're going to say the Windows root view controller. So the root view controller for the window, the starting point, is going to be just an instance of our view controller. That's the root view controller. Last thing we have to say, this is kind of like using lazy in that you should just do it. Make key end visible. Shows the window and makes it the key window. Shows the window, makes visible. That makes sense. Make it the key window. What's the key window? Do you guys want to know, or should we just keep going? Let's just find out real quick. Key window in iOS application. The apps key window. Key window. No, understanding windows and screens. Here's some really old documentation. Key window. The window is considered the key window when it is currently receiving keyboard and non-touch related events, whereas touch events are delivered to the window in which the touch occurred. Events that don't have an associated coordinate value are delivered to the key window. Only one window at a time can be the key. Oh. Just think of this as making it the main window, making it the one that's available to the user. Now, really exciting part. Let's see if it works. If not, we gotta debug. Oh man, somewhere it's still looking for the main storyboard, I'm gonna bet. Could not find a storyboard named main in bundle, NS bundle. Let's go look at our info.plist, application scene manifest, enable multiple windows, scene configuration, application session role, item 0, default configuration. Ah, it's looking for another storyboard called main. That was really annoying. So there was a line in here saying what file to look for your storyboard. And now that we have a scene delegate, we have to go into the scene manifest. You have to look at the scene configuration. You have to look at the application session role. You have to look at the item 0, which is the default configuration. That sounds good. We also have to say, don't use the storyboard called main in there. I hope this works. You delete the row. So in your info.plist, you're going to delete main as the name of the storyboard in 2 places. Once at the outermost level, and then in the application scene manifest. Ayla, when you deleted it in the target, did it get rid of both? All right, let's add it back. Or, hold on. Boo. Yeah. All right. So the way that Ayula suggested is just delete it from there, hit enter. Let's see what it changed to here. Got rid of that line. Down to the application session role. It's still in there. So, dang. It was a good try. Maybe there's another place we have to delete it in the target. But making sure we've gotten rid of it, requesting that we use the main storyboard, it will now launch using the window that we set up in the scene delegate. Just gonna get rid of this stuff, cool. And again, you can kind of use this stuff out of the box. You can also find out more about what it does. Totally up to you. Just remember that in your scene delegate, you need to set up a window, you need to add a root view controller, and you need to make sure that that window becomes the key window and is visible to the user. Mm-hmm. You could put it in your app delegate in this function called did finish launching with options. Look at all these wonderful functions. There's some questions besides, why do I love this so much? Go ahead. Crystal. When we check off what? Yes, I would check off storyboard and then remove it. Otherwise, you're working in a different paradigm. So this would be Swift UI. Were you able to create this all using like a Swift UI project? I've never really used Swift UI, so I don't really know. I think so. The main difference is that in the scene delegate, it's going to try to use some like Swift UI things in here by default. Like how your storyboard was set up with a default view controller, it's going ahead and saying, hey, connect to this default view that I've set up. So if we want to keep doing stuff with like constraints and stuff, I would just set up the storyboard one, delete the storyboard, delete those things out of the P list, and set up your window. There might be a more elegant way to do it, but Liana and then Adam. Okay, Adam. Why no storyboard? I guess it's not so much a crutch as, yeah, it's a crutch. Because what it's doing in storyboard, if you think about it, all your storyboard is doing is setting up the initial state of your view. And then you had to still do everything else in your view controller. So maybe why not just do it in there? Yeah. So let's talk about pros and cons of storyboard. Right? Pro is we see where stuff is, right? What? What is that? What you see is what? Okay. What you see is what you get. What else do you guys like about storyboards? Intuitive. Drag and drop for a lot of things. You can just drop objects in without having to define them. Maybe no code. Pros and cons. What? GitHub issues. I would say also you can't define behavior. No, by like define behavior, I mean you can't actually make it. You can make a switch go on and off. You can change a control, but you can't actually say like this control changes this label. You have to do that in your code, right? That's I guess that's what I mean. Tell me about UI test though, or what you mean by UI. Just what you were thinking.
I know that's a thing.
That is a thing. There are UI tests.
Perhaps going back to Adam's question about having to run it every single time to see if we're getting what we want instead of UI tests.
Yes. You might have UI tests that stop you from having to run it every time. I would say, yeah. So the same way you have unit tests to test your models, you could have UI tests to test your views so that you can make your assumptions about your view and then create it after that. But none of that sounded appealing, that's also okay.
Sounds like people would generally do that, or they would just hit top and play and see where it is.
I would say more the latter, but if you're working on a big project, you would have UI tests so that you know it works how it's supposed to, just like with unit tests. Like if 30 developers are on a project, that helps you figure out like what it's for.
Would UI test work for like a particular size screen, or would it work for all?
I think you could set the screen type. I haven't really done much UI testing. What are some other cons about storyboard? Sorry? Auto layout can be tough, yes. Tough. That's tough. And as we've seen, doing this programmatically, while I probably don't recommend it, you can just literally say, where should this be on the screen? Not using constraints, just saying the X, Y, and width and height. So my recommendation to you is use whatever you want. But know that ultimately they're interchangeable. Every object I can create in a storyboard, I can create in my view controller. But because I can't define behavior in my storyboard, doesn't mean I don't have that view control. So they're interchangeable in terms of views. Aaron.
And you can use both of them at the same time, right?
You can use both of them at the same time. I could add labels just like we did when we were converting our view controller. We hadn't deleted that label and that switch that were in the storyboard when we added the label and the switch that TSO kindly created. They're interchangeable, let's say, and compatible. Last thing I'll say is that there's a lot more stuff that we can do from the view controller side where you'll need to do that using code. We're going to talk about animations. We're going to talk about keyboard handling. That stuff, just like changing the text in a label based on some control, needs to be done programmatically. So eventually you reach a point where maybe the storyboard was convenient, but you might want to refactor it into the view controller. biggest thing here is if you're working on group projects, you should figure out your approach. That's pretty big. Figure out which one you're going to use. Do not use both. Or if you can help it, don't use both. If you're going to use a storyboard, norm that. If you're not going to use a storyboard and do it all programmatically, norm that. So you can know how your code should work, how you're going to debug it, etc., so on. B.
In a real world setting, do you see most like apps being used via storyboard or being done programmatic?
Really, it can be either, which is why you should know about both. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the way that you prevent GitHub issues, but still are able to use Interface Builder. You might have seen these files before. It's called an XIV file. Zib. Those are like you taking a view out of the storyboard, putting it in its own file, and then just using it from there. So that takes out a lot of the issues with storyboards where everyone's trying to do stuff in the UI at once, and it makes a big mess.
When were storyboards introduced?
No idea.
They've been here since Swift 1?
Let's
Or
look
was
at
it
it.
something that like, is it newer, like Swift UI is brand new? Like,
Yeah.
Something that was recently introduced for companies, I guess 5 years ago, probably didn't even have access to a storyboard, or?
They definitely existed before Swift,
Okay.
so when apps were just
Alright.
Objective-C. Cool.
That's enough.
Yeah. They've been around a while.
Cool.
Let's take lunch.